Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here, back from Munich. Saw lots of Spurs fans out there, of course. Spurs fans on the flight back as well, including one very nice, polite man who told me he liked my stuff, even if sometimes I put them out a little bit too late. I feel like I'm responding by doing exactly the same thing again. It is not intentional. Of course, people can watch in the morning. I just kind of try and fit them in after a day of work. It's just the best way to do it for me. But yeah, lots of Spurs fans heading to Munich, and we're all treated to the same utter rubbish. It was dreadful. It was not good. Especially for those of us who have had the quick turnaround of the tour, which, to be fair, the players did as well, and I think that showed too. But there's a lot of other factors to speak about because, look, if anyone at Tottenham Hotspur thought that the club was ready to enter a season that, let's be honest, brings with it UEFA Super Cup next week, the Champions League, of course, is back on the menu, and a Premier League season, which probably is going to be one of the toughest in a long time because the amount being spent at other clubs and the amount of purchases being made at other clubs and the amount of movement and action at other clubs. I guess there's movement at Tottenham, but probably not the kind that really impacts Spurs because they've sent out 76 players on loan. They haven't, but it feels like that. Look, if there was any feeling that they were ready to enter this season, Tottenham Hotspur, anyone in that club felt that. I think that night in Munich, early evening, let's say, obliterated any thought that they were nearly ready to go into this season. Look, I know you're encouraged not to read too much into pre-season results, and that's true in a lot of cases, especially probably the result. But I think nights like that, you can just see the difference. It is the old cliche, men against boys, even when in the second half, it was boys on the Bayern team, pretty much. I was going to say spanking Spurs, which sounds a bit weird when you talk about boys. So we'll say heavily dominating Tottenham. That's okay, I think, isn't it? It was a study for me of two clubs, very different clubs, run in very different ways, from very different leagues, but both with very different benchmarks for success as well. I was, as you do, when you're in kind of the media areas, you get to walk around parts of the stadium that the fans maybe don't get into. And I was walking down this corridor, and it had one of these huge, what do they call it, honours boards, I think is the best way to say. All clubs have it, all levels have their kind of what they've achieved. And I was just looking at the Bayern one going, oh my word, because you look at it, it is ridiculous. It is just line after line after line of we won this, we won this, we won this. And the main competitions, there's like a billion years, seasons after it. And you think, my goodness, this is a club that has won so much. And it's like line after text. 6 Champions League European Cups alone on there. There's only one section that stands out. And the reason it stands out is because it's got only 1 year in it. And it is the UEFA Cup. Because Bayern have only won the UEFA Cup once. 1996, I think it was. But it's kind of not their fault. Because they barely ever needed to be in Europe's, second-tier competition. Sorry, no disrespect, but it is the second-tier competition. We love it because it was fantastic. And it brought us our first trophy in 17 years and first European one in 41. So we still love you, Europa League, don't worry. But for a team like Bayern, if they're in the Europa League, they've kind of failed the previous season, haven't they? And I guess this is the difference we're talking about in levels and what's expected of teams. And of course, Bayern do benefit from, they are a dominant team in their league. We know they are. Most season, the rest of that league looks up to them. And anytime some upstart dares to kind of beat them and finish above them, pretty much that young upstart is absolutely raided and ripped apart by not only Bayern, but other clubs across Europe as well. So it just status quo goes back to Bayern dominating that league. But they're able to create this kind of super team because of it all. This was only their second friendly since the holidays they had after the Club World Cup. Yet they just look ready to steamroll into another kind of campaign. Whereas Spurs, in contrast for me, kind of looked as beaten, battered and knackered as they did last season. which isn't a good look. Like I said, I think I do, if I'm going to give them anything about the performance, I do think the turnaround of a 14-hour flight and then I think one full day off after that and then flying out to Munich, it's going to have some impact. Of course it is. In a completely different way, not playing or having any energy to really spend. I know because I had that turnaround, I had to head off to Munich, and it's a bit knackering, especially after a mad pack squashed in tour like that was a shorter yet more frantic tour than anyone really before that I can remember. And the thing is with Spurs, we talk about last season, but the injuries are mounting up again, and they're doing so despite the changes in management. They're doing it despite the changes in the medical staff at the top, despite the changes, I think it's sports science staff, performance staff at the top as well. Thomas Frank's currently without Dominic Solanke, Destiny Udogie, James Maddison, Dejan Kulusevski, of course, Radu Dragusin, Manor Solomon. Kota Takai hasn't even kicked a football for this club in a match yet, in any kind of friendly game. We asked Thomas Frank about those kind of first three injuries. Solanke, Udogie and Kulusevski. He said it's 3 different cases. I think Dom is quite soon. He'll be available. Destiny will know more about in the next couple of days in terms of how it looks in detail. And Kulusevski is out for a long time, which I spoke about before. He kind of followed that up afterwards by saying he hopes that Solanke will be fit for the start of the season. And yes, I know that's been moved a couple of times. We thought maybe it was going to be the Newcastle game, and if not Newcastle, then Bayern was what he said, and now it is by the start of the season. Whether that technically means the UEFA Super Cup, I was going to call it UEFA Cup. Whether it's for that or Burnley, you would imagine the way he's saying that suggests more Burnley. I asked him whether he was worried about Udogie. Obviously this knee injury and there's kind of speculation going on around it and everything and exactly what it is. He said, I'm not worried. We'll just know more info in a couple of days. So we should find out hopefully about that this week. And look, it's a time when the transfer window is all well and truly wide open and has been for a long time. And, Spurs have just struggled, really, haven't they, in the transfer window? I don't think there's any way of anyone can dress that up as anything but. Especially now we're seeing it, like with the injuries biting again. You can see these little areas where the squad is thinner than it needs to be. And this was a summer, I've said this before, where Spurs need to push on. They're trying to catch up with sides that are miles ahead of them. And yet they're letting those sides spend so much more than them. It's not even just the spending, he's acting quickly and getting really good players in through the door. And Spurs are kind of just feels like they're looking and going, oh, that's nice, that would have been great. And it's like, come on. And look, I know there's a big bloated squad, of course, but also as important at Spurs as anything else, and it's always been a huge Achilles heel, getting players out the door. Indy, you might hear Indy in the background. He's annoyed as anything by it. He's always going on about it. Always, Indy, about not being able to sell players. What is that all about, he says. This is the thing. I know some people say, well, how can you bring in extra quality, all of this sort of stuff, if you've got such a big squad and you need to get players out the door? I think you're at the point where we've seen this so many years in a row where Spurs don't bring in enough quality because they can't get rid of the players that aren't of the required quality. And you could argue, why sign them in the first place? But that's a whole other subject. But yeah, you need to improve that quality within your squad. You can upgrade people. You can. As brutal as it is, you can do it. Even if they've just won a trophy for you, you can upgrade them. And hey, this is their logic with the manager, isn't it? This is what they're trying to claim. The powers that be that made a decision that Thomas Frank will be upgraded on Ange Postecoglou in their eyes. So you can also do that with players, and you're just going to have to sort out how you get rid of those players after, unfortunately. We're at that situation where you can't sit around and wait for players to want to leave, because often in many cases don't want to leave, because despite the fact that we know Spurs' wage structure, we're always talking about it not being as good as the big boys, things like that, having those higher ceiling, it is much bigger in a lot of cases than a lot of teams in Europe. And then you can't offload players to teams in Europe because they'll be paying substantially less and they don't want to go because of that. It is the vicious circle of Tottenham Hotspur. But, I just, like I said, I think this is the key thing for me. And I hope, in a way, I know it sounds weird, that there is worry within Tottenham about the fact that they needed quite, I felt, major transfer surgery. Not really little tweaks. They needed a big injection of quality, whereas other teams are doing exactly that. And yes, they're spending, like all the big boys pretty much have spent 200 million plus, haven't they, on their transfer window so far. Whereas the Spurs, depends where you want to do this. People have different ways of doing this. We all have different ways of looking at stats, things like that. You could look at it and say Spurs have signed Kudus for 55, Takai for 5, and who's the other one? João Paulinho on a loan, with a potential future fee. You could do it that way. So what you're looking at, 60 million there plus a loan, which will have a loan fee, of course, within it. Or you could look at it the fact that Matisse Tell's loan was made permanent for, what was that, about 30 million euros? I can't remember exactly how much that works out in pounds. Some people want to drag Kevin Danso's deal into this window as well. I don't particularly think you can. I think I'd probably give you Tell, because that is a deal that has been negotiated and agreed and executed in this window, whereas Danso was negotiated and agreed in a previous window and was an obligation. But yeah, look, either way, with all that semantics, because you're not getting anywhere near a 200 million plus total. And that's the trouble. If you are 17th, we're going to use that. This is the thing again, if we're going to go back to the 17th place in the table being the issue. If that is the issue, you are 17th. All of these teams, we're just talking about top 6 teams here. So, all of that gap between those two, they're hugely increasing their squad. And Spurs have made just a couple of tweaks. I'm sorry, a couple of tweaks is not going to get you up there. It's not going to get you up to where you want to be. Absolutely. I don't know why my voice is going really high, because I'm pointing high. But yeah, it's just not the way to do it. Johan Langer, saw him out in Munich. He was. It was only after the game I saw him. He was around outside the dressing room. He was on his phone in the old classic way we always used to see Paratici as well, without the long. I think he was actually just holding it straight to his ear, for those who have a real interest in phone usage, rather than Paratici's wired-in earphones. He was walking around, and of course we'll be all hoping that he's trying to push some deal towards its conclusion, because between Johan Langer and Fabio Paratici, that's a long list of contacts, a really, really long list of contacts and connections within the transfer market. Yet between the two of them, thus far, we have essentially 2 new faces ready for the first team. One of those is a loan signing, which is paltry when you look at it in comparison to what the other clubs are doing. There's no getting away from it. I can't say any more than I just said. And it's not even like you could say, Spurs, what they're doing here, they're doing the honourable thing. They're not blocking the pathway for all of these young players coming through at the club. They're trying to build club-trained players. But they're not, because they're sending them all out on loan. There are so many going out on loan. It's incredible. I told you, didn't I, in the previous video, maybe even the one before, I certainly wrote it days ago in an article, that there's this long list of players that have been made available for loan. And there was more today. Yang's headed off to Portsmouth. There's a strange one. Alfie Devine's gone off to Preston North End, which isn't strange in itself. But what is strange is that he's signed a new contract, which is till the end of 2027 with an option for a third. It's essentially an extension of a year. Yet Preston, in part of their deal, have got have got an option to buy him. So essentially, in practice, that contract is there to ensure his value remains high, which 3 years rather than 2 in total, in a way. I don't know. I don't get it. I do feel sorry for Alfie Devine. I feel like he has been a little bit mucked around over the recent years. He had so many loans. You might remember me saying last summer he kind of had some really good options, from what I understood, to go out earlier in the summer. Spurs didn't really want him to go out, then changed their minds, and then late in the summer he went out, and kind of all that was left was a move to Belgium, which was a good experience for him, but still, and this is a player that I think has impressed in pre-seasons. It just hasn't really kicked on. Loan number 73. And look, I really do feel, and I know I've said this before, so I'm sorry for repeating myself, but it's kind of part of my point here is the failure to prize away Morgan Gibbs-White from the clutches of the Forest owner Evangelos Maranakis just seems to have knocked Spurs off their feet entirely, and it shouldn't, because in any kind of organisation, especially recruitment-wise, surely, and again, I could be very naive in my thinking of this, but surely you have your top candidates. Sometimes you maybe have 2 or 3 that are on a similar level, but some are more available than others. And if one does not work, you swiftly move into operation on getting another one into action. Whereas we're weeks since the whole Gibbs-White stuff, and still Spurs have got no number 10 through the door. And look, I've said this again. I think we would have been completely different. I think there would have been a lot of praise for what Tottenham had done. If they'd got Gibbs-White through the door, that would have been at 48 hours or so, and 115 million would have been spent. It would have been seen as really proactive rather than reactive. Yet, like I say, we're weeks on. No natural number 10 available for Thomas Frank at all. The spotlight is hugely on that situation now because, of course, James Maddison, we now know, ruptured the anterior cruciate ligament in his right knee. He's going to miss the bulk of the season. Of course he is. I feel so sorry for him. I mean, by the time he's going to come back, he's probably going to be he'll be heading towards his 30s, which is just weird the way it all is. I think he turns 29 maybe in a couple of months. Yeah, it's just a situation that's really had this light shone in it now. Obviously, Kulusevski, in Frank's own words, there is going to be a long time. If you're not aware, patella surgery had towards the end of last season, and that was after the Mark Gay tackle, wasn't it, at Palace? But the thing is, as well, we know Spurs have got the money. That's another thing as well. It's in the past that we've maybe said, like, ooh, Spurs, people say Spurs claim poverty, all this sort of stuff. We know they've got the money because there's been these bids that went in for Gibbs-White of 60 million and beyond. We know that the pot has now been added to with Sonny has officially gone to LAFC for a MLS record fee of more than £20 million. So that's all in there as well. So the money is there, but it just hasn't found its home in a club where very good players come from. I don't know why that went in that really awkward direction. By the way, I don't know if you saw Sonny's press conference, but it was an interesting angle to go on that he admitted that it wasn't his first choice to go to LAFC, but he was convinced by the owner. I don't know whether that's always a good way of going about it or not. Be interested to know where his first choice was, whether it was a team in Europe or not. I had always been told that the MLS was something he was interested in, so perhaps it was into Miami to play with Messi, or I don't know. But I just thought it was an interesting way to take. As it was when a moderator at one of them, or certainly someone on the lectern, suggested that they were really hopeful that Sonny would really help USA at the World Cup. And not quite entirely understanding the way that football and playing for your national country works. But yes, it all gave us a great laugh, didn't it? But yeah, like I said, money's there. There's no fear within the club. They cannot finance their transfer plans for this summer. But what exactly are those plans? This is the kind of thing. We're not seeing the evidence of it being put into play. Is the delay due to a lack of number 10s on the market, maybe? We were kind of some reporters have been kind of racking our brains thinking of number 10s. Of course, we don't have a scouting network, so we're not aware of all these wonderful number 10s that are kind of on the horizon or the next big thing. But, obviously everyone's going to keep going to those two words, Eberechieze. I'm sure he doesn't say it in a weird Italian accent, but yeah, he kind of remains in play for anyone that wants to try to make that move. Whatever the money that it takes to get him from Palace, there's so many different stories about potential release clause, potentially being a lot of money up front. There's so much to do with him. And, there's suggestions that people around Palace think that maybe, or they're expecting Spurs to make some approach at some point. But, of course, we also know about the Arsenal interest in him as well that's been there, and whether if Spurs were to go in, would that just trigger Arsenal into action or not? I don't know, but he is someone that I really like. But is there something more to it? Does maybe Thomas Frank think he doesn't entirely fit what he wants to do? You just don't know. Have they been told by Eze that maybe he does want to go to Arsenal and that's the only option for him if he were to leave Palace? We don't. There's so many variables we don't know of, but it just feels like he's sat there on the table or on the shelf in a way, and that's really disrespectful to Palace. I don't mean it to be, because they had a brilliant season, won the cup, But it does feel like right now there's a couple of players with uncertain futures there with him and Mark Guehi as well. Spurs have got an interest in Como's 20-year-old Nico Paz. But those within the club kind of deny any bids being made. I know there was some reports of a bid. I think maybe the difficulty with him is that Real Madrid, where he came from, have got this 50% sell-on clause reportedly. And of course, whenever you have a 50% thing anywhere, the selling club will naturally raise the price because they're thinking, well, we're going to lose half of this. We need to get a little bit more for ourselves. So it could be a very big fee for someone who I think has only played 43 senior games. I think it was 8 for Real Madrid and the rest at Como. So he's not someone with a great deal of experience. And, quite rightly, some people out there might suggest, well, that's another young player who might not be entirely ready for Premier League life being thrown at him and everything. And is that the best thing? He's an Argentina international. He has played three or four, maybe 3 times for his country. So obviously Romero will be well aware of him. He's actually born in Tenerife, but plays for Argentina. What other names we had? Harvey Elliott's been linked with Spurs. Jack Grealish, I think, will always be linked with Spurs forever, just to taunt me after that horrendous window when they should have signed him and didn't. I've had some fans suggesting to me, why don't Thomas Frank and Tottenham go for Christian Eriksen, 33 years old now, free agent, bring him in. Another one that you'd think too, if you're going to talk about reuniting with someone, would be Mikkel Damsgaard at Brentford. But he's January, I think he signed a long-term deal. So that would seem unlikely also, mainly because why would Brentford let anyone else go? Some talk that Newcastle might be able to get Visser away from them. They are just going to be a club that's been gutted from the inside out. You fear for them. That's just not a nice summer. It really isn't. And I mean, look, if there's anyone that's kind of set up with a structure within to try and bounce back from that, it's not good for them. Thomas Frank was asked within the stadium when we were all there, he was asked about that number 10 position and getting someone. He said, I think we're definitely in the market in general for a number 10. Of course, when players get a long-term injury, like Matters, we need to look into that, but generally we are in the market, yes. He was asked if anything's close, to which we got the classic manager answer of, nobody feels close or far away. I'm not saying anything before there's anything that is completely 100%. And look, we spoke about this before. It's not just a number 10 either. He wants another central defender due to the concerns over the lack of availability of Christian Romero, Mickey van der Ven for long periods of last season. I told you in the last video, Romero just 26 games out of 60 last season. Mickey van der Ven 22 out of 60 last season. And of course there is Radu Dragusin, who's going to take time to get back to not only fitness but the sharpness. Always say that after an ACL, it takes so long to get back to anywhere near the level they were previously. I mean, but Bentancur, I feel like we're starting to see only now the kind of real shades of Bentancur that we saw pre-injury, which is just crazy. It shows you how long it kind of takes them to get anywhere near. I think it's confidence within their knee as well. And this is unfortunately all that's going to happen to Madders as well. And on top of the central defender and the number 10, Thomas Frank appears to have now decided that maybe he would like to replace Sonny after all. Earlier in the tour, he's been really bigging up the options within the club, these kind of young players that they've got. But I just wonder whether after seeing a real lack of creativity against Newcastle, which was a bit of a weird game anyway with the whole Sonny aspect to it, but also against Bayern, I mean, I think Richarlison had a couple of efforts. Tell at the final whistle pretty much volleyed an effort at Neuer. That's it. And I think he's probably looked at those games, looked at the fact that they're constantly trying to use Kudus as an outlet, and it's really, really obvious that that's the only way they can kind of attack. And I think he thought, yeah, maybe if we're losing a former Golden Boot winner, and someone obviously racks up the goals and assists every season, probably maybe we should bring in someone who's a little bit more ready-made. And he was asked that straight out after the game, and he said, Sonny was a key player for 10 seasons. He has left the club. We have both good young players in Matisse and Wilson, and they're really promising and can perform. Brennan can also play that side. As I said, we're in the market. If we think we can find the right one who can improve the team, then he will be signed. If we can't, then not. I do wonder whether the wording of that, because he was kind of referring back to his number 10 answer, does that mean someone like an Eze who can play as a number 10 and play on the left? Don't know, but it would fit. Just speculating wildly, but it would. You could tell I had a proper sleep last night for the first time in ages, even though with the travelling. Got a little bit more full of beans despite that. The Spurs were absolutely rubbish. I don't know where that's come from. Well, I do. The sleep, I just said it. Yeah, and look, he needs help, Thomas Frank. When you look at it on paper, is the easiest way to look at it. This is fact. I was going to do Rafa Benitez there. Lost Son permanently. Maddison for much of the season. Kulusevski for a big chunk of it. Solanke for pre-season. 4 players alone, 91 direct goal involvements. That's goals or assists last season. Ripped out of the team. I mean, come on. It's really not rocket science to kind of look at that and say, okay, so that's 91 direct involvements in goals, replaced by a player who only scored 5 last season in Kudus. Yes, just couldn't kind of build upon an excellent debut season, which brought 20, maybe about 23, 24 goal involvements in all, I can't remember. But yeah, last season, 5. And a defensive midfielder in Paulinho didn't even goal or assist last season. That's not his game. That's not what he's going to do. So you're replacing 91 goal involvements with, I'm going to be completely fair, it's 5 goals, 4 assists, I think, for Kudus last season. So 91 for 9. And, you know, it doesn't take a lot of brain power there to figure out that if that team with an extra 91 goal involvements finished 17th, what could happen without them? Hopefully Solanke will be back. But come on. It's there on paper. You have to replace. You have to improve the quality in the team. And look, I'll keep going back to it because it was such a big thing to come out and say at such a awkward time when it comes to stuff like this. Daniel Levy made these big proclamations. Europa League is not enough. Wants to win the Premier League. Wants to win the Champions League. But I would actually say the expectations right now of Spurs, especially after this really sluggish transfer window, probably couldn't be much lower than they ever have going into a season. I mean, I'm not a betting man, I don't normally look at that, but it's just I've had this kind of flood of emails in recent days from all media get this. We get all these emails from the bookmakers to kind of tempt us into writing an article about them. I have opened them just purely because I wanted to see what the odds are and what people are putting in, kind of what they think and what they're betting on Spurs being. I would say most of them I've looked at have placed Spurs and predicted them as being bottom half team in this season to come. I mean, wow. You know, I know things have been tough, and I know they finished 17th last season, but to have the thought that, oh, well, they're probably going to be bottom half again next season. What has happened to the club if that is the expectation from the outside? And look, I'm not saying it's expectation inside, but it does tell you a lot about how people are viewing what Spurs are doing right now. You know, I know Thomas Frank is obviously trying to make them more defensively solid to ensure that there could be nowhere near being in the bottom half. But then you have a night like in Munich last night where it shows just how much there is left to be done even on that as well. And he's at this stage right now where, a bit similar to Postecoglou towards the end of last season, he hasn't got the attacking and creative players available and fit to him for him. So the problem there was Postecoglou had no transfer window at that point to fix what was happening going into the final rounds of the Europa League and everything and the final games of the Premier League season. But Thomas Frank does, as in around him. There is a transfer window to help him to fix what is going on right now. And this snail's pace of movement, it feels from the outside. It may be that they're trying a million things and everything's failing, which also isn't particularly good, I guess. But this snail's pace of movement, both in buying and selling players as well, it's just so bewildering in a summer when they needed to push on and close this. I don't know, a gap like that. It's a huge gap between the sides above. And I think most of all, they needed to make a real splash in the transfer market to ensure that Thomas Frank hits the ground running. You know, it's not something he's done at his previous 2 clubs. And they know he needs to hit the ground running because if he doesn't, everyone's going to look at the decision to sack Postecoglou and say, well, why? Or a big what if about it. And also, there was this assertion that Postecoglou should have done better because the squad at his disposal was far better than kind of where it finished in the league. And, ignoring obviously the fact that they won the Europa League. But if this squad is not sufficiently added to, and I still hope, you would think it's going to be, a few weeks to come of significantly improving the squad. I think they know they have to. But at this current moment in time, if it remains like it is, that kind of assertion that the squad was good enough that Postecoglou should have done a lot better, it's going to be under the microscope. Because if Thomas Frank then can't do anything with it, you go back to the original decision. You go, whose fault was it, kind of thing. It's... Look, I know I've spoken about this as well before, in manager's first summer, there's going to be a certain amount of time spent analysing, working out, could this player be good for me? I've never really seen them in up close and personal. Do they work? Does this player who maybe the club were going to sell, could they actually be better in my system? Could this player who was really good in the previous manager's system actually be not really that important for me? So I get it. There's a lot of that. However, Thomas Frank identified pretty much immediately that he needed a number 6, that Spurs did not have a natural number 6. He said this in quotes because I asked him about it when we were talking about Paulinho. And that he would need one for his system. They missed out. They obviously wanted Christian Norgard was one of the people they looked at, but eventually they would sign João Paulinho on loan almost 2 months after Thomas Frank was appointed. So it's like he had this immediate thing he had kind of shown that he wanted, and it took almost 2 months for that to actually be a thing. And look, maybe they were prioritising the winger signing. They wanted Kudus in the door first, but this is not swift movement. And it's just going to be interesting to see now how Thomas Frank, he said it himself, there was always going to be this honeymoon period where he was bedding in, and he'll be swiftly finding out all the little funny idiosyncrasies that there are at Spurs. And, this is a club that there's no getting around it. Managers come and go like London buses. They do. They don't stick around for long. The average is 18 months to 2 years or so. The Pochettino 5.5 years is very much an aberration. I think what will help, and I've said this before, is Vinay Venkatesham coming in as the new CEO. He's, from what we understand, trying to change practices within the club, from the top down as well as time goes on, because he is one for stability. It was very much like that at Arsenal. Sorry to say that word. And I think he's trying to create this management structure within a club that is so much bigger than it ever was before. I think it's 800 or so staff, I think he said, didn't he, in that video. I think he's trying to change a lot of how the club runs. But is it going to be something you're going to see immediately? It doesn't seem to be the case at this point. But look, for Thomas Frank, he can only control what he has going on with his staff and his players. And I do feel like he's probably learning more and more about the players after every single game they've played. Their strengths, their weaknesses, also how they react to situations, difficult moments. There's a little moment that I found fascinating. And this is such a classic, you'll probably think, thing that I would only find interesting. But I very much watch little moments in games. It's kind of my thing. It means I might miss something in the overall structure, but I like to kind of zero in on these little things. And look, Brendan Johnson and Jed Spence both had really difficult game yesterday against Bayern. They were not alone, of course. They weren't. Brendan Johnson really struggled to make any impact down the left. Obviously, the first time we've kind of not had Sonny down there, or post-Sonny anyway. And there was one really good tackle he did coming back and did a sliding tackle. But that was pretty much what he was having to do. He was having to chase back the whole time and trying to help out Jed Spence. Jed Spence, I thought he started okay, but he just kind of got progressively worse as it went on. And what I would say is, while he did really well against Bukayo Saka in the Arsenal friendly in Hong Kong, this time he had this dual threat of Kingsley Coman, Michael Olise as well, and it was just all too much for him. And look, most fullbacks are going to find that too much for them as well. And it just meant that I felt the left side especially was all at sea for Spurs. And again, you shouldn't forget the quality that Spurs are up against. Olise and Kane were both among the nominees for Ballon d'Or on that very day they were announced. Olise was brilliant. Olise was just levels above everyone else on the pitch with what he was doing. I mean, Kane was very good in everything he did. But it just felt like when you're up against that kind of quality, you can't do the things that Jed was doing. He was trying to do too much with the ball. There were a couple of occasions we had 3 or 4 people in front of him, and he's kind of trying to dribble through them intricately. And look, one of those times, I think it was a second goal, he got caught in possession, and Heung-min curls a lovely strike towards goal. That's the thing. The best players will always punish overindulgence. If you do too much with the ball, they'll just take it and go, thank you very much, we're going to be clinical with this. And that is one thing I would say about the 4 finishes from Bayern. They were all really good. They were good. Kane's low finish was excellent, although something else to that we'll talk about in a moment. But the 3 finishes after that were all just... There was nothing Vicario could do. I saw Vicario against the flak. I felt that was really harsh. I actually felt he made a couple of really good saves. I think there was one from Elise, a flying one. There was a low one, really close range from Kane as he came into the box. I thought he did okay. I don't think he could do anything. All of the shots flew inside the corner. But yeah, it's... I was back to my point, wasn't I? The little observation I kind of made. And again, you might think, all of that for this? But they both came off. They were taken off, Jed and Brennan. And I just noticed Thomas Frank really watching them closely, how they kind of came off after. And so what happened was it kind of almost looked like he was glaring at them. It was interesting to watch because we weren't that far away. We could kind of see it. So Brennan Johnson comes off, does the old high five, slaps Thomas Frank's hand, and then he goes along the dugout doing the same to everyone in the dugout, staff and players. Jed Spence did the high five on Thomas Frank, but then appeared, I've got to say, this is from my view, I couldn't see exactly what was happening on the dugout, but I could kind of see where he headed, and it looked like he headed diagonally to an empty seat and disappeared and sat down. And I just felt like Thomas Frank was watching exactly what he did. Because I think Jed was coming off having a bit of a whinge, a bit of a moan. It could have been at his own performance, could have been at the team's, whatever. But I just thought it was fascinating that Thomas Frank completely stopped watching the game and was focused exactly on what Jed Spence was doing. And look, I'm not saying that either reaction was right or wrong from Johnson or Spence. I don't think sometimes disappointment's a bad thing. I don't think a player feeling angry at how a game has gone is a bad thing either. But I just feel it's really interesting that he was watching. He watched him for a while until he then decided to turn back to the match. It was a good couple of minutes or so, I'd say. Well, maybe a minute. Sometimes things feel longer in the moment, don't they? But I just feel like he's going to be learning more and more about how players tick, and that kind of informs his man management of them as well. So we're in that period as well. Sorry, it's my weird way my brain works. I find little things like that really fascinating. It's the little things for me that add up to the whole. But yeah, look, there were some things that Jed Spence and Spurs could complain about, especially in the first half. I mentioned the Harry Kane goal. Let's just say at the best, some of the officiating in that first half was interesting, dubious, some might say. Not very good, many would say. Downright awful, a lot of others would say. When Kane scored, we didn't have replay monitors, so I got a load of flack from people that saying, it was a lovely finish from Kane. They were like, ignore the offside. So we can't see from our angle on that split second it was offside or not. And we didn't have a replay, so I had to wait until people uploaded them on social media to see it. Which is weird when you think about it. Like a massive, amazing stadium like the Allianz Arena, apart from the fact it takes an age to walk to. Anyone that had to do it will know how long that took, the journey from the train station to get up to the actual stadium. But enough of those whinges. Replay monitors, please. But anyway, a yard offside at least when you watch it back. It was Elise's ball over the top. But then also, they had a penalty by not long after. Palhinha adjudged to have fouled, who was it? Stanisic. Watch it back, doesn't look like there's any contact at all. It just kind of goes down. So, dodgy penalty. Justice served on that occasion because Harry Kane slipped and fired the ball into the stratosphere. Some say it is still travelling towards the moon. But yes, he did slip, so it's not like he just ballooned the penalty over. But yeah, look, those are the only complaints Spurs could have. Other than that, Bayern were unfortunate not to run up an absolute cricket score. I mean, it could have been the same as the game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in 2019. They were just all over Spurs. Spurs didn't know what to do. They were camped out essentially on the edge of their own box. Only got out a couple of times in the whole game. It was not good. It was not a, come on lads, let's go into the Super Cup in fine form. It did kind of suck all the positivity out of the end of pre-season. What there had been, the Arsenal game I said there were lots of threads of improvement. Newcastle game was just more about Sonny, wasn't it, than anything. But yeah, this was dreadful. It was not good at all. And I think what made it even more galling was the fact that in the second half, Vincent Kompany makes 10 changes, all the outfield players come off, puts on a lot of youngsters, and they're all scoring goals. 17-year-olds scoring, 18-year-olds scoring, and it's like, because Spurs had left on the bulk of their players because they want to get them fit for that Super Cup game against PSG. And right now, that's just as terrifying as it was in the first place. And look, PSG, obviously European champions, Club World Cup finalists. I don't think they'll have played a single friendly when they go into this game against Spurs, which we can take any little crumb of hope we want out of it. I think it's been a month since they lost to Chelsea in New York. But it doesn't kind of matter in respect of Spurs will once again be taking on one of Europe's super clubs, an opponent that is far better prepared for the season ahead than they are, and stocked with talent to the eyeballs. And look, this is the level that Spurs have been aiming for just feels far too long to aim for something and not try to get there. Spurs need to create something so much better than the expectations that have kind of been laid out from to meet those expectations that have been laid out from the very top, because words are great, actions are vital. That's all it's about. To dare is to do, some might suggest. To dare is to do, not to talk about it, as he spends 41 minutes talking about it. What else before I head off? Did an interview with Lucas Bergvall after the game. It's quite a nice little read. Look on my social media. You'll find all the links to that, to have a read of that. He spoke about trying to maybe become Thomas Frank's magic number 10. I say magic because he said that you need a bit of magic to be a number 10. Spoke about the players kind of knowing that Sonny was going to go before it all came out. And yeah, loads of other bits and pieces which were quite interesting. It was good fun, Lucas. Despite the fact he'd just been beaten, he was in quite a talkative mood, which, teenagers, sometimes it's difficult to get a fair few words out of them. But he was good. And also, actually, if you want to look at my social media in a complete different way, I wrote this long read piece on Thomas Frank. Told us all about, we had a sit down with him in South Korea, and he told us all about his crazy summer, which involved talks with Spurs while he was on a European road trip with his wife. A huge, I think, 2-3 day party where he likes to party, in his own words. I don't know, I've been a big foreigner there. I think he was up to 2:30 one night, 5:30 the next night. Much celebrating was had, and it was just a really open and honest account of this crazy summer and like when Spurs first got in contact with him, how it all played out. And yes, everything he was trying to arrange with this kind of celebration of life party that he was doing in Denmark. And yeah, he was quite funny in it. And it was nice to take a little break from the stuff that's annoying about Tottenham right now to kind of, I think it gives you a really good insight into Thomas Frank. If you're not really aware of Thomas Frank, the man, the character and everything, this is a really good, not from anything that I've done, but purely from his words, in getting a sense of what he's like. He's a fun character, and yeah, a real family guy, and a bit like Ange, father that passed away, and kind of trying to make them proud as well. There's a little kind of crossover there too. But just, yeah, I felt it gave a massive glimpse into him. And yeah, so please do have a little read of that. That's kind of it, really. You'll be delighted to know that I've got the next 3 days off. It is my birthday tomorrow, Saturday. I'm going to try and just recharge for a couple of days after this kind of manic tour straight into Germany thing. And then obviously Super Cup next week. So I'm just going to take these 3 days off and have a little bit of R&R to try and mostly get some sleep, as I did last night for the first time in a while. Got a decent sleep. And yeah, and hopefully if it causes the fates to collide and maybe make something happen in the world of Tottenham Hotspur, that would be great. But yes, I shall be back. I shall be back in Italy for the Super Cup in Udine, and I will do a video after all of that. We'll talk about what happened with PSG, and hopefully it won't start with an enormous sigh. I really hope not. So yeah, as always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves. I shall catch you later. Goodbye.